Hello, my name's Adrian Goldberg and welcome to Byline Radio, or if you're listening on catch up to the Byline Times podcast. This time, the consultant renouncing Shell after working for them for more than a decade. Caroline Dennett shares her story of disillusionment with the company's delivery of climate change promises. And it begs the question, perhaps the bigger question, of whether we can trust any of these big energy companies with their green pledges. Before we get cracking with Caroline, just a reminder that Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast are supported by subscriptions to the Byline Times, our brilliant monthly newspaper. If you want to find out more about the Byline Times, check out our wonderful website as well, bylinetimes.com. What we're about is independent, investigative journalism, not in hock to any corporate interest, not answerable to any political party. We just try and tell it like it is, really. Tell the truth and expose those who are responsible for wrongdoing and for not telling the truth for what they are. So feel free to come and join us. Take out a subscription to the Byline Times. More information at bylinetimes.com. So it's welcome to Caroline Dennett. Hello, Caroline. How are you doing? You're right.
Yeah. Hi, Adrian. Hope you can hear me okay.
Great. You've caused a bit of a stir in the last 24 hours or so, posting a video and effectively renouncing a Shell, a company that you've worked for more than 10 years. You didn't work directly for Shell. You weren't an employee of Shell as such. Just tell us what you do and how you came to be involved with Shell in the first place.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. That's right. So I've got a small business that contracts with Shell very specifically on safety culture assessments. So cast your mind back to 2010, if you can think that far back, if you're old enough to do that. There was a massive oil incident in the Gulf of Mexico, Deepwater Horizon. There's been a very famous Hollywood film produced as a result of that, where it was a terrible incident. There was, lives lost and huge environmental disaster in terms of release of oil into the sea. Now, that wasn't Shell. That was, sadly, that was BP who did that. But Shell and other players thought, do you know what? It's lucky that it wasn't us. That could have been any player out there, actually. And they wanted some way to not predict, that would probably be too far a stretch, but to really understand, what are the values and attitudes and behaviours at the front line of the oil and gas industry, that might indicate whether we're setting ourselves up for something similar. So they asked, would I design a process safety culture survey? I'd never done any work in the oil and gas industry previously, but I was a survey expert, I suppose, for want of a better word. So together with some Shell frontline engineers, we created a survey, an in-depth survey that would, go out to frontline employees and contractors to really understand their perception of safety performance and safety culture. So we did a test and, a pilot and a test, and thought that'll be it. We'll hand it over to Shell. They'll do it in-house, or they'll get a much bigger player than us. But they offered us to do that globally for them, which was, felt like a great honour, really, because we are a tiny company. And so we've been doing that across many of Shell's assets all over the globe, not having to travel, I have to say, but remotely employing survey employees, with a very in-depth questionnaire that focuses on things like, are workers empowered to mention something that they feel is unsafe to their boss or to their colleague? Are leaders saying the right things and doing the right things in terms of putting safety before production, and not expecting people to take undue risks or cut corners that might lead to something unsafe. So that's what I've been doing really with Shell and other clients in the industry and in a different sector as well. So sorry to interrupt, Caroline. So go ahead.
Your expertise then, are you an engineer? What is your expertise? I'm just curious, really, to know what you do.
So not an engineer at all, but really have a good understanding of what drives human behaviour, and really analytics, I suppose, is our power. So having collected all the data, via this big survey that goes out to frontline workers, we will then look at all the data. That's tick box data. quantitative data, but also lots of open feedback. So, it was a really good opportunity to capture the voice of people who work at the front line, because they could genuinely say, well, I've seen this, or I'm not so happy about that, or we're doing great on this, but not so great on that. And it was a hard-hitting survey. It was designed to make the leadership team of that site feel uncomfortable about their safety performance. Because if you feel comfortable about your safety performance, something's going to bite you for sure, because it leads to complacency. So it was very deliberately a hard measure, and I take my hats off to Shell for doing that. And because lots of companies just seek to kind of confirm that they're doing well. We're doing a great job on safety, aren't we? And that does lead to complacency. So my expertise really is in understanding the behaviours and what influences behaviours, and the part that safety leadership plays in that. And by safety leadership, that's not just management, kind of like everyone can be a safety leader, and it's just really about how we behave and how we influence other people.
Yeah, so effectively, these oil wells are there, these production platforms are out there. That obviously predates you by many decades. You're going in to say to the workers there, okay, if there's a safety issue, are you confident that you can raise this with your boss, perhaps without fear of getting sacked? Is there a proper mechanism by which you can put your hand up and say, there's a potential deep water horizon or other catastrophic events, and let's try and prevent it before it gets out of hand?
Exactly. And that could be, that could be a personal harm as well, like, oh, there's something that's not right, but yeah. And for them to be able to have a conversation with someone via a vehicle of a survey, to be able to do that, so that we can get the early indicators that something might need looking at. And again, that will be not people ever intentionally setting out to harm anyone at work, but more just the unintentional thing, when people are under pressure, or they just want to get the job done, there's just, people have got blind spots, right? In your daily work, you don't always see everything. And if someone says, hey, actually, that's not very safe, you need to have a culture that accepts that, and where people don't get irritated because someone's called you out for something. So it's all about the culture, really, and perception, and there is no reality in safety. It's only ever what people perceive to be the case.
Yeah, and I'm sure people, whichever kind of company they work for, they'll be familiar with management, where if you raise concerns, in some cases management will treat you as a troublemaker, but good management will have their antennae twitching and say, this is good, this is helpful, let's try and create a culture in which everybody can put their hand up and say, I think there's an issue here, we need to sort it for the greater good. And in 2010, when you started working for them, I'm going to say not directly for them, but you were hired through an agency to work for them as a consultant. At that point, 2010, did you have any thoughts about climate change? Were you conscious of it? Was it in your mind at all?
Probably, yeah. So we're probably heading into 2011 by the time we were up and running with Shell. But no, not so much climate change, because that probably wasn't, even though I was, environmentally aware, that it wasn't in our everyday conversation. If you read something, you might think, oh yeah, there is probably we did talk about greenhouse gases and global warming. That was probably more, we weren't perhaps thinking of it in terms of climate change, but so there was some awareness of that. But I think from my perspective, I was aware of the polluting nature of the oil and gas industry, or the potential for that. So I wasn't particularly overjoyed. I wasn't thinking, yes, this is an industry I really want to work in. But I think having seen the opportunity to keep people safe, from personal injury or harm, to help prevent those leaks, whether that's oil or gas escapes, loss of containment, or whether it was something like the Deepwater Horizon. When you look at the pictures from that incident, it was so devastating for the Gulf of Mexico and all the communities, who rely on the waterways around there. And I think the opportunity to do good, it seemed like an opportunity to really make an impact. And I have to say, in the 11 years that work has been valuable. It's been valuable to me.
It's interesting to hear you, Caroline. Obviously, you've kind of been through this process, and you've wrestled with your conscience, and I'll explore why you came to the conclusions that you did. But I think many people listening to this will understand that you didn't create the oil and gas platforms, you didn't create this industry, but you were offered the opportunity and the chance to at least ensure that this business worked as safely as it could and worked as well as it could. And given that it's there and one person alone isn't going to make it disappear anyway, even if they wanted it to, then you can do, as you say, some good by intervening positively to at least make sure it's as safe as it possibly can be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me, there is a sadness in what I've done, because I've had, great working relationships with people at Shell who genuinely work very hard to make sure that, the work is as safe as it can be. We forget, I think, every time we turn on the gas or turn on the lights, that there are people who every day put their life on the line to go and work in, what are very high risk situations on oil and gas platforms, but also, at plants and in the manufacturing stages. That's real people's lives out there. And I have a great deal of empathy for people who have to go and do that job every day. And sometimes they don't see those risks. And it is a shame to not carry on doing that work, because it has had value. But it just got to the point where I thought, if I felt Shell was genuinely transitioning to a renewable future, I would want to see that transition through as safely as possible. But I just felt that isn't happening. And I was asked to work on, a couple of surveys for new construction projects, which means, they're building new infrastructure for oil and gas. And I just thought, this isn't transitioning. And when I was asked to create a kind of new survey for that, there was an indication that there's more of these, there's more of these to come. And I think that is when I just started thinking all the warnings around climate change, and they've been around for quite a few years, they are getting more and more severe. We're seeing it, aren't we? We're feeling it. Even here in the UK, we are starting to feel it. And there's obviously countries out there, and a lot of them where the oil and gas industry are, that is really feeling this very seriously, with severe high temperatures, flooding, just an unlivable world already for them, where some places are seeing already 2 degrees or more of global heating compared to pre-industrial levels. So it's there's been a sadness, and I have wrestled with it. I think that's a really good term. But you have to live with yourself, and when a kind of marriage isn't working any longer, I suppose it is just time to walk away. And I think I did want to make an impact, because I wanted to raise awareness, and I wanted to let other people in the industry know, if you feel like this, perhaps you can seek a more sustainable job or career, and it is possible to do that. But I wholly appreciate that I am in a lucky position. I had the luxury of choice, and that many people who work in the industry at the front line, they don't have that choice. It's for them it's oil and gas or bust. Genuinely, there isn't a lot of alternative good opportunity.
And do you mind me asking as well, how much of your business then was reliant on Shell? Is this a big thing in the context of your overall business to give up?
Yeah, it is actually, and, perhaps somebody looking on might think, wow, that looks a bit like kind of commercial suicide, really, to do that. It's not quite that serious, but yeah, they have been a significant part of our revenue, and not just our revenue, but, of a life, really, lots of hours spent, working on this and working very closely. So both from a kind of, revenue point of view, but also, just on a kind of, just on a human basis, it has felt like quite a lot to turn my back on, and that has taken me a few months from the point of kind of like thinking, this is what I need to do. That it has taken me a few months to really take that leap of faith and say, okay, now's the time.
Yeah. If people haven't seen your video, it's very easily available online. If you just search Caroline Dennett Shell, Caroline Dennett Shell, it will come up. But you talk about Shell having a disregard for climate change risks. You accuse them of double talk on climate. And I should say, before the end of this broadcast, we will hear Shell's response to that. They say that they're operating beyond the design limits of our planetary systems. They're not putting environmental safety before production. And you say that Shell's stated safety ambition is to do no harm. Goal zero, they call it. And it sounds on vulnerable, but they are completely failing on it. They know that continued oil and gas extraction causes extreme harms to our climate, to our environment, to our people. And whatever they say, Shell is simply not winding down on fossil fuels. I mean, you could hardly be more blunt in your assessment of where Shell are at the moment.
Yeah, well, we've always had a harsh measure of safety culture, and it's kind of still in the same tone, really. I just think it has to be called out, because so many commentators in the industry, the International Energy Agency, for one, says we must not take any more new oil and gas out of the ground. It's as simple as that. If we've got any hope of having a livable future, and by that we mean really no more global heating, but we know we're heading for it. We know we're going to shoot past 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. That's already on the cards. But if we've got any hope at all of having a decent world where humanity continues and all other forms of life can survive, as they should do, then we just have to stop. And I by that I don't, they don't mean, and I certainly don't mean turning the tap off right now, but having a really, quite radical strategy for changing energy sources happens now. And I think, my biggest disappointment with Shell is they are a mammoth company that has incredible capital in terms of finances, technology, engineering, human power. They could be visionary leaders in the transition to renewables. They were pioneers once. They brought us lots of the luxuries that we have today in terms of how we live, how warm our houses are, how we travel. And it just seems such a shame that they don't have a vision for the future. They are deeply wedded to to continuing with fossil fuels, even though the International Energy Agency, United Nations, pretty much every scientist out there, bar a few, are all saying we have to change, and we have to change radically. And it would have been wonderful to have been able to see them through that transition. And there are other energy companies out there. A very good example is it's Enel, ENEL, the Italian energy company. They are going full pelt to decarbonise their national grid. So it is possible, but it's just deeply disappointing that they aren't acting quickly. They could be great world leaders on this, and it's really disappointing that they're not.
Yeah, I noticed that the chief executive of Shell, Ben van Beurden, is due a wage packet of something like £13.5 million this year. Of course, his pay packet is inflated by the oil crisis in Russia. And is it a failure of leadership at the top, in your view? I mean, if you can see this in 2020 vision from your point of view as well. I mean, we all supposed to see the world in 2020 vision in our own minds. If you can see this so clearly and see this opportunity for Shell as a very wealthy company to grasp the nettle, why aren't they being serious about climate change?
It's difficult to unpick that, isn't it? Because as an onlooker, it looks so blooming obvious. But, I think there's a few things. They're deeply wedded. They've invested in the infrastructure for years. It's what they know. It's extremely profitable. So I guess for them, it's why would you turn off that? Why would you risk that? And perhaps they can't see how to really monetize renewables in the same way. Because it's so much easier and cheaper for the infrastructure compared to oil and gas, which does take a lot of investment to first even explore and then test and then actually build and produce. So I think there's that. I think they're bankrolled by the financial services industry, with huge investments. They're also completely wedded to fossil fuels and don't see that they want to change that. So big investment houses, so many pension funds are invested in fossil fuels. It's horrendous. Even in the UK, it's 128 billion pounds of pension fund money is sunk into the fossil fuel companies. So there's a huge infrastructure around this, which I guess when you're in it, that's all you see. They live and breathe the oil and gas industry, and I guess it's not helped possibly by governments who subsidise the oil and gas industry, or like the government's new approach to energy is to offer the opportunity for more licenses for new extraction. So that doesn't help. There's kind of like a melting pot of reasons why they would stay, and yet on the outside of that are these very clear warnings, and anyone with eyes can see what's going on. And it's just, I think they're just caught. They're caught up in it. It is like an addiction. I think they're so wedded to it, and they just don't see that there's an alternative way of life.
And I mean, and you mentioned the big investment houses. You mentioned pension companies. Ultimately, these oil companies are answerable to shareholders, and shareholders, I guess, tend to be short term. And if you're not delivering dividends to shareholders will want to know why. And if they're not satisfied with the answer, then the share price may well drop, and that might well affect the bottom line of the people at the top of the company. That's not in any way to justify it, but perhaps to explain it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, there's a very good quote from Sir David Attenborough, I think it is, that says something like, this is not verbatim, but it's something like, it's crazy that our things like our pension funds and our banks and our savings, are investing in fossil fuels, which jeopardizes the very future that we're saving for. I mean, that is the kind of economic and moral madness that Antonio Guterres talks about. We can when we stand back, we can see that, and I just think a lot of people really don't understand how their money is being invested. If you're a council worker, for example, or you're a police officer and you're in a big pension fund that you don't really have much control over, you're not managing that yourself, I think you just assume that somebody is doing good with your money, and that money is being invested in a way that is good for your future. And then when you find out that that's not the case, actually, that someone is investing it in an industry that is actually narrowing your future opportunities for even life, I think a lot of people actually get quite angry when they realise that they're not aware, because that's not in the public conversation.
You mentioned government. I think I'm right in saying that if all of the current licenses that have been granted for oil and gas exploration were proceeded upon, just the ones that have been granted, that the UK would bust its net carbon target, net carbon by 2050. We would bust that target simply on the licenses we have granted now.
Exactly. So we're already overshooting on hugely at a time when we do have to really take stock now, because the earliest date I've seen for when we may hit 1.5 degrees of warming as an average, it is 2026. Well, that's, when you hear a lot of the big companies still talking about 2050, it's like they're saying, we've got until 2045, we've got until 2048, they're counting down to midnight. Well, we're already past midnight, frankly, and if 2026 is the worst case scenario, admittedly, the most likely, I think, is around 2032. That's not in the future. That's now, isn't it? People plan holidays, in 3 years' time. That's not unheard of.
Well, I mean, the UK government's strategy, just to confirm, is to meet a net zero target by 2050, by which the climate may already have been impacted beyond repair. I mean, it's there is a call for and a need for radical action. Did you have an epiphany, Caroline? Did you have a moment where you just thought, I cannot go on with this anymore?
Yeah, I did, and probably that was the last report from the IPCC and the speech from Antonio Guterres at the beginning of April, where it really, we've gone past, his code red for humanity, which was, I think, just after COP or around COP26 last year. It's ramped up. Now I think he was calling it, just shameful. Our performance on climate risk reduction is now shameful. And just these messages, they're deep. They're based on the science that has been around for quite a long time, and I think that it's just ramping up, isn't it? And just that realization that things are then they're as bad as they can be before they're so bad we can't mitigate it any longer. And that's back to the analogy with Shell. They do take great care to operate within the design limits of their equipment, of what they're using. You don't put the system under so much pressure that it blows. And yet they're putting the system of our planetary systems under so much pressure that it is blowing. It's certainly flaring, and it may well completely blow the top off. And I think that they understand that language. They understand the language of disabling alarms and ignoring alarms, but the alarms are sounding so shrill now that we just can't go on ignoring them. We absolutely have to take all the necessary action, and do it now, because if we don't do it now, that action that we need to take is going to become more and more severe. Like COVID. COVID showed us what can be done when governments really focus their efforts. And to avoid something like that, we can transition in a smooth, peaceful way now. But if we go on, things are going to get very, very difficult for people.
You've been with us already for a good half an hour, Caroline. I'm sure you've got other things to do. Have you got another 5 or 10 minutes or so just to take a call from a listener?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would love to. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Let's get a word with, I think it's Aman. Aman, just wait there a moment. I will, Caroline, as well, just read you what Shell have said to us, because I thought it was only fair that we should hear Shell's point of view. They say, be in no doubt we are determined to deliver on our global strategy to be a net zero company by 2050, and thousands of our people are working hard to achieve this. We have set targets for the short, medium and long term, and we have every intention of hitting them. We are already investing billions of dollars in low carbon energy, although the world will still need oil and gas for decades to come in sectors that can't be easily decarbonised. So they're flatly rejecting the allegation, Caroline, that you're making.
Yeah, and they would, but it's just like, well, where's the proof? Where's the evidence that they're on target? Because again, what are those targets? When are they going to start reducing? Because if you are seeking new licenses, and they are in and around the coastal waters of South Africa and Namibia, that's not transitioning out, is it? I just don't know how they think they can achieve a target unless they're really thinking we're going to do all that target in the last 10 years that we have left, between 2040 and 2050. Because surely you would say we're going to do everything that we can now, and let's make a start, which means from today we're not going to seek any more licenses. There's enough reserves already, and as you just said, Adrian, just based on what is already been granted, we are going to overshoot on our carbon emissions. So it's words, it's just words. I'm afraid that's my observation from what I see operationally going on the inside.
Let's bring Aman Sharma into the conversation. Hello, Aman. You're welcome.
Hello.
Oh yeah, welcome. Yeah. What do you want to say, Aman? Oh, I'm not sure what's up with Aman there. Let's speak to Kathy. Hello, Kathy. How are you doing? You all right?
Hiya, good morning. Caroline, lovely to hear you speak, and totally respect you for making the stand that you have and speaking out and taking action, reflecting on your own sort of, conscience, I guess, isn't it? It's interesting. I remember the Deepwater Horizon incident very well. And one of the things that concerns me at the moment, back then in 2011, it happened as a result of sort of, I think it was like an inferior concrete mix or something like that, which they knew about. And due to the lobbying of the oil and gas industry, etc., it had been deregulated. All of the inspectors had been sparsely shared around, and there just weren't enough people to go around to check each oil rig. And what happened. What concerns me now is our government, for example, in the North Sea. They're of a mind of deregulating, check out the red tape. We're already suffering from a bit of regulatory capture. Is this something that concerns you too?
excellent question, Kathy. And it does, I have to say, because what we will see happening is as the oil and gas industry becomes less profitable, and it will, over time. I know they've had bumper, profits just now, and it becomes more difficult to produce. The oil and gas industry, the big players will start to annex, their less profitable businesses and sell it out to, more local operators. And, I think people will take their eye off the ball in terms of safety. Shortcuts will be made because the race to just keep on producing will be there, and that will lead to more incidents. And I think that is a genuine concern. I think it will become increasingly deregulated. I think when the big players, perhaps sell stuff off to smaller players, they won't have the resources to put some of the safety, some of the safeguarding in place. And I think that is I think we could see far more incidents. And of course, every day there are smaller incidents. And, if you look in the Niger Delta, there's areas there which have been absolutely decimated by leaks, oil leaks and to see more. So I think you're right. I think, we could be heading for a place where there's more, there's even more pollution, and that will have a devastating effect on our land and seas, and not great for wildlife. So I think it could potentially get dirtier as things go on.
Great stuff, Caroline. Thank you, and thank you for joining in, Kathy, as well. Really appreciate your contribution, Caroline, and it's a brave and a bold thing that you have done, and it certainly sparked a lot of debate, not just on Byline Radio and the Byline Times podcast, but elsewhere in the media as well. And, we take our hats off to you. And
thanks, Adrian. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on.
No. Well, I hope you contribute some more as well. It'd be great to hear from you on another occasion as well. It's, it really is a significant intervention, I think, and I would encourage people to check out your video. If people just put in Caroline Dennett Shell video, I'm sure they'll find it. Thanks very much indeed to everybody who's listened. Don't forget, if you want to support free and fearless journalism, check out the Byline Times, our monthly newspaper. You get details on how to subscribe to that at bylinetimes.com. And your subscriptions not only pay for your newspaper, they pay for the website, Byline TV, Byline Radio, and the Byline Times podcast. So thank you all very much indeed for listening. Stay tuned to @Byline Radio for details of more Twitter Spaces when we go live, and all of these programmes as well we will endeavour to put up as well via the Byline Times podcast. So please spread the word. Thanks very much indeed, everyone. See you soon. Ta-da.